Namaskar, everyone. Much of what I had wanted to talk about has been touched in brief by quite a few speakers. I think all of us are drawing upon the same sources. And what I thought that I'll start with is works. सिंह साहब आप अकेले नहीं थे.
आपका डायनामिज्म अभी शुरू ही हुआ है.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'll go back to what Nagenji had talked about. I hope it will allow me. Yes. Okay. So this is a very famous quotation of his, and he talks about each soul is potentially divine. And then I was talking to Uma Raoji, and she was saying that many of the talks until that point of time they've been focusing upon the internal. Many of us have talked about it, that while our current education is more focused upon the external, maybe it is the internal which needs certain focus, not only in education, but maybe in training as well. And I thought that I'll go back to what Himanshuji was talking about the definition of leadership. And this is one which I've taken from a particular textbook, and within which a very common sort of a problem is about the common goal. And I thought that even though the conference is about ancient wisdom, I'll try to draw upon something which comes from the West and then see as to how we can probably illuminate that further. So when we talk about this common goal, it becomes a conundrum, particularly. So if you ask people, and usually I do it in my not only schools but in executive training as well, and I ask people as to why did you change your last organization? Okay, many of them will talk about CTC, some of them will talk about toxic bosses, some of them will talk about rising sector, etc., etc. And my immediate response to them was, but then did the organization give you a job because it was running out of burning cash and it wanted to dispense some to you, or probably it wanted you to get rid of a toxic boss? And the obvious answer is not. Right? And therefore the organization has its own goal, and it is seeking you as a tool in that particular direction. For you, the organization has a goal to kind of further some ends of your own. And therefore, unless and until we can bridge these two, there's no leadership as such, right? Okay, it is something else altogether. And therefore that common goal conundrum, and I talk about these three different ways in which organizations can probably bring people together. One sort is that from normative, something like Ramakrishna Mission, Vivekananda Kendra, or organizations of that sort, where the people join on the basis of their identification with what the organization is about. For example, if I look at Ramakrishna Mission itself, Atmanu Mokshartham Jagate Hitaya Cha. So that is the idea. So for the self, it is moksha, and jagat, hit of the jagat. For people who are called upon to do that, only those kind by the self-selection process, they'll join that organization. As it is, there is no incentive as such, right? There's no salary that people get. So when the basis of membership is identification, identity, then the sort of commitment that comes in is that of moral commitment. Okay, I know of many people. I worked in Vivekananda Kendra for 6 years. In fact, Nagenji had interviewed me for that in Gwalior, in my hometown. And then I had gone to Bangalore, and from there I went to Kanyakumari for my training, and then I spent some time in the Northeast. So that is a normative type of organization where the commitment is moral. Second kind of organization, Excel for me, maybe yours for many of us here, where the basis is quid pro quo. Remember we talked about incentives? Okay, and therefore it is quid pro quo. Ek haath de, ek haath le. So the kind of commitment that it calls forth is calculative. What am I getting? What am I giving? Etc. etc. And that is the second part. The third kind of organization that we could be looking at is that of a coercive. And the typical examples that are given are out of a prison or of an asylum. If I try to escape from the prison and people catch me, they'll probably kill me or maybe gun me down or whatever. And therefore the basis why do I continue to stay in the asylum or the prison is because I'm afraid. And therefore the kind of commitment, it would be a parody to call it a commitment, but still they call it alienative commitment. The more you stay there, the more alienated do you become. So that part. Now, this is not really mine, as you can see. It is from Amitai Etzioni, pretty old, 1961, and he wrote about it in his book called A Comparative Analysis of Complex Organizations. Okay. Now the idea is that these three, in turn, will bring commitment, compliance, or resistance inside the individual. The question that I follow up with is asking as to whether it is about the type of organization or is it about the mix, the pie chart of the commitments that people have. Right? All of us have been at different stages where these have been varying over a period of time. And therefore the argument that I would then make is that for a particular leader to be able to move forwards in terms of leading one's organization or the group of people would be probably to minimize the coercive part, optimize the calculative part, the utilitarian part, and maybe maximize the first one. How do you get there? And how do you get there? So from the Guru Stotra, right? The first one, it says, Akhanda Mandalakaram Vyaptam Yena Characharam Tatpadam Darshita Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. And this is something which I was taught in Vivekananda Kendra myself, and that is Akhand Mandal Akaram. Akaram is the shape, Akhand is unbroken, Mandal is a circle. So a circle by definition is unbroken, but for convenience sake, what we do is that we try to see it as an ever-expanding spiral. What is the argument? The argument for the individual is that all of us are at different levels of identity simultaneously. Okay? And here also 2-3 of us have already spoken about it. And therefore, if I can expand whether my sense of identification is narrow or broad, and all of that we have already talked about. I usually take people through a particular example. So if you remember, one of the worst IR disasters in India was about a DGM HR being burnt alive in Maruti Suzuki, Manesar. Okay? And the reverberations still continue. Firms are still kind of rather loath to take people from that area, etc. So that was Mr. ABCD. And then the fundamental idea was that all of these contractual employees who were looking for better emoluments, etc., and even though they are doing the same work, they are not really being given the same kind of benefits. So the question that I ask my folks is, so was this person taking the decision as me, myself, what's in it for me? Or is this person looking at what is my role as a representative of HR? By and large, the HR department is limited to the permanent employees of the organization, people who are on my rolls. Okay. Now the idea is it only about HR? Is it about Maruti Suzuki? Will Maruti Suzuki be able to prosper if people only look at the people who are full-time employees? Shouldn't you be looking at all of them together? Now, it is not only about Maruti Suzuki. Do I consider myself belonging to the automotive sector, etc., 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 so on and so forth it goes, right? That spiral can continue to expand. And that is what I feel will take us back to what we have above united consciousness here, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So the Vasudha, the entire creation. I then take this further and I say that even if I look at myself, whatever it is that I do, am I doing it for my benefit? Alternatively, another level of identity for me is that I am a representative in the OB department. If I am taking the decision in favor of the OB department, it is possible that the OB area faculty will be able to accept my lead. Okay? If I'm only for myself, everyone else is also promoted to kind of look at oneself only. But if I look at OB, at least these many people will follow my lead. But what about the non-OB folks then? And therefore, maybe I should start looking at myself as an XLRI faculty. Now, the idea is it is not only faculty, because now the non-faculty are against me. And therefore, can I look at myself as an Excel employee? If I look at that, then maybe all the employees would be able to take my lead. I can take that further to a B school, etc., all of that together. So what is it that we are looking at? When we are looking at leadership, when we are looking at organization development, we should be asking ourselves, and maybe we should frame this up better, at which level am I taking the decision? That alone will determine my leadership potential. The more restricted it is, the more restrictive my appeal, the more expanded, the broader it is, the wider would become my appeal. Which would also probably take us back to that common question in any leadership session where they talk about whether Hitler was a good leader. And my counter question to that is always, go and ask the Jews. Okay? So, and therefore, if it is restricted to a particular category, इसीलिए ना वो सबका साथ, सबका विकास के साथ सबका विश्वास भी चाहिए, right? So the beneficiaries do not belong to a particular category, a region, etc. It is about all of them together. So at which level are we taking that particular decision? And therefore, I go back to Swami Vivekananda, who said, all that is selfish is immoral, all that is unselfish is moral. I was talking about this to my son last night. He was asking me, Papa, आप क्या बोलने वाले हो? And I told him, बच्चा घर के अंदर कोई बेटा भी कोई बेटी भी बड़ी ना हो पाए जब तक उसके माता पिता अपने परिवार के साथ अपने को ना जोड़ें. All of us who are here is because our parents sacrifice their days and nights for our upkeep. Our children are also around for that particular reason itself. And he says, ये तो बड़ी अच्छी चीज़ है. मैंने कहा करेंगे कैसे? Okay, so the idea is as to what is it that you do, because if I'm more wedded to a lower identity, I would be loath to give it up, right? Selfishness versus that part. And therefore, another kind of thing that I keep saying all the time, so you're not moving towards selflessness. All that you're doing is you're moving towards enlightened selfishness. So which is here, and therefore can I enlighten that? Can I expand my idea of the self so that maybe all of those people will be able to take that forward? So that is one that I talk about. And second, Himanshuji has already talked about it, the commonly known label, where we talk about all of this. I won't read this. I only talk about this part here, which is about effectively regulating emotion. What is it that we can do? We can probably go back to Chanakya Niti, where we talk about bandhai vishya sangam muktai nirvishayam manaha maneva manushyanam karanam bandhana mokshayoho. Okay, so the idea being manev. मन ही मनुष्य के बंधन और मोक्ष का कारण है. Mind verily is the cause of man's bondage or liberation. What do we see? So we start looking at Patanjali Yoga Sutra, chapter 1, verse number 33, and Singh Sahib has already talked about it in the passing. I'll try to go into detail, that we cannot kind of cultivate positive negative together. If I'm feeling angry towards my wife, I probably do not feel loving towards her at that point of time. If I feel more affectionate towards her, anger is far away from my mind, right? It is only one of the two. So the technology comes from here. What do we see? So we see Maitri Karuna Mudita Upekshanam Sukha Dukha Punya Punya Vishyanam Bhavanataha Chitta Prasadanam. I'll go to this in detail. And I talk about, so the objects that we get of our experience. So the idea is, those objects could be the ones who are happy. Those are the objects who could probably in distress, pain, etc., etc. These may be the objects or the people who are punyatmas, so to speak, or they could be papatmas, okay, apunya. That kind. Now the idea is, when I encounter these objects, these people having those kind of experiences, what kind of feeling arouses inside of me and what is it that I can do about it? So what I do about it is probably for people who are happy, by and large. I remember there's a Dupatta Sagar नाम की एक दुकान है जमशेदपुर में, बिष्टुपुर में, काफ़ी फेमस है ना? तो लेडीज़ का मैचिंग सेंटर वगैरह, सरदारों की दुकान है और वहाँ पे जनरली गुरबानी वगैरह चलती रहती है. तो और वो काफ़ी सारे टेप, वो स्टिकर्स वगैरह भी लगा के रखते हैं. एक बार मैंने उनसे पूछा कि आप ये वाला स्टिकर मेरे को दोगे क्या? क्या लिखा था उसके ऊपर? आदमी अपने दुखों से उतना दुखी नहीं है जितना दूसरों के सुखों से. And I stuck it outside of my door. मेरे नेबर ने पूछा किसको बता रहे हो? Okay. So the idea being that if I see someone who is happy, if I see someone who's kind of enjoying sukha itself, so can I cultivate this idea of maitri towards that individual? मतलब उसको लेके मेरे मन में ईर्ष्या क्यों होनी चाहिए, right? I should not be having that, and therefore how can I cultivate that is point number one. If I see someone who's in dukkha, घर के अंदर तो मतलब रेगुलरली देखने को मिल जाता है. आपने बच्चे को कुछ डायरेक्शन दिया, कुछ किया और उसने उसकी अवहेलना की और वो गिर गया, लग गई उसके. इमीडिएटली हमारा रिएक्शन क्या? देखो कितनी बार बोला है, भूला नहीं है तेरे को. And all of that is what we do. Inside organizations also, this is something which happens normally. Okay, so when someone is distressed, someone is pain, what do? I should probably display compassion. करुणा उसके प्रति मैं दिखा पाऊँ क्या? Then if we look at punya, कई बार नहीं होता, आप धर्मशाला जाइए, मंदिर वगैरह जाइए और वहाँ पर पता पड़ा कि ये वाला फ्लोर, ये वाला कमरा किसी ने बनवा दिया, इमीडिएट 2 नंबर का ज़्यादा आ गया होगा. ओके, सो मस्ट हैव अर्नड थ्रू दोज मीन्स एटसेट्रा, और कहीं तो भी इसको बैलेंस करना इसलिए ऐसा कर दिया. द आइडिया बीइंग, इफ आई फाइंड समवन लाइक दैट, कुड आई डिलाइट इन दैट पर्सन्स जेस्चर, कुड आई लुक एट दैट. और फिर अपुण्य, आप चाहे OTT देख लीजिए, आप चाहे न्यूज़ चैनल्स देख लीजिए, आप चाहे न्यूज़पेपर देख लीजिए, सारा का सारा नेगेटिविटी बायस है. ओके, एंड देयरफॉर व्हाट डज द पतंजलि योग सूत्र टेल अस? उपेक्षा. Unless and until I am able to do something about it, it would not really serve any purpose to kind of continue discussing it ad nauseum. खत्म करो ना यार, बात को कर क्या पा रहे हो उसके बारे में. If you can do something, of course. If not, let it go. So the idea is that if I start doing this more and more, and if it becomes second nature for me, I'll be able to radiate, I'll be able to project a particular consciousness which is calming, tranquilizing, clarifying, elevating. What do? How do I measure myself on this? So over a period of time, and this also I learned during my stay there, which says over a period of time, the three, for example, the typical reactions that come inside of me, the kind of measure, the metric that we could have is, which could be about frequency, intensity, duration. Arishad work की बात हो रही थी अभी, six that we talked about. So the idea is how intense is that particular emotion which is aroused inside of me, for how long does that continue, and how frequently am I assailed by all of that. Over a period of time, will I be able to get that down? बड़ा सुंदर सा एक स्वामी राम सुखदास जी का प्रवचन मैंने अटेंड किया. आई थिंक दिस वाज इन 95 और 96. साधक संजीवनी उनकी एक काफ़ी फेमस गीता प्रेस की किताब है, बहुत ज़्यादा. एंड ही वाज मोर देन 80 years of old एंड ही वाज काइंड ऑफ डायग्नोस्ड विथ थ्रोट कैंसर. और उनको मना किया हुआ था डॉक्टर ने, बट ही कंटिन्यूड टू स्पीक बिकॉज दैट इज़ व्हाट ही वाज बिल्ट टू डू. कभी भी आप उनका कोई फ़ोटो वगैरह नहीं देखेंगे, क्योंकि बोले कि आप अगर मेरा फ़ोटो लेंगे तो आप भगवान को भूल जाएंगे, इसीलिए आपको उनका कहीं कोई आपको फ़ोटो नहीं मिलेगा. नेवर वुड ही अलाउ दैट. And I remember having attended that session. उन्होंने प्रवचन दे रहे थे माहेश्वरी भवन गुवाहाटी के अंदर, और उसके अंदर बोलते हैं कि एक जनरली आप लोगों पे अगर देखें तो उनके ऊपर जो संस्कार पड़ता है वो ऐसा है कि जो पौधा थोड़ा बड़ा हो रहा है, ऑन इट्स ट्रंक उसके ऊपर आपने एक निशान कर दिया. जैसे जैसे वो पौधा पेड़ में बदलता जाता है वो निशान बड़ा होता जाता है. आपके ऊपर जो इम्प्रेशन पड़ा है और ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम वो उतना ज़्यादा बड़ा होता गया. वो बोले उससे अच्छी प्रकृति का इंसान वो है जिसके ऊपर पड़ा हुआ निशान एक मेटल के पीस पर है, जो कि ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम भी उतना ही रहता है. उससे बेहतर क्या हुआ? तो बोलते हैं कि आप सागर पर जाइए और आप उसका जो तट है आप उसके वहाँ पर एक ट्विग लीजिए, यू टेक दैट, कोई आपने पूरी एक छोटी सी ली और आपने उसके ऊपर निशान कर दिया. कम द नेक्स्ट वेव इट इज़ गॉन. He says better still would probably be person who is having that particular impression drawn on the surface of water. By the time you complete that line, you don't know where it has begun. He says the best is if you take the same twig and you try to draw a line in air. ना शुरू होने का पता पड़ता है ना खत्म होने का. Thank you.